Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving into a specific public debate that came up in the sources you shared.
Right. This was on that show, Voice of America, broadcast from Seattle. The material mentioned, it's known for pretty sharp political segments.
Exactly. And the host for this one was Brown James.
And the topic was a big one. Race in America, criminal justice, and, yeah, partisan politics.
The sources really paint a picture of the two key players here, Jasmine Crockett and Candace Owens.
How they walked out, even.
Yeah.
Crockett described as confident, articulate, really looked like she was aiming to, set the tone.
And Owens. The sources note her calm demeanor, but they make it clear pretty quickly her arguments were sharp, not gentle at all.
So the goal here for this deep dive isn't just to replay the debate blow by blow.
No, not at all. We're using the source material to really explore this specific confrontation, understand what made it hit so hard. We want to get past the surface arguments about race and justice.
And look at the dynamic. And
Mhm.
specifically, that challenge, that moment, the sources say, just shifted everything.
Think of this as us guiding you through the material, pulling out the key details, the factual stuff presented in the sources themselves.
Right, let's get into it. Setting the stage.
Okay, so the host, Brown James, according to the sources, he kicked it off by framing the main tension,
Which was?
Congresswoman Crockett's perspective on systemic inequality in the justice system.
Versus the argument you hear from people like Candace Owens that the system basically works, and maybe race gets used as an excuse sometimes. That's how the sources frame it.
And Crockett's initial response, the sources say her voice was low, steady.
Yeah, arguing the problem isn't mentioning race too much, but that it gets ignored. Until, and this was a direct quote in the source, someone pays with their life.
Powerful framing. And Owens, what was her counter?
The sources mention a cold, confident smile. Not warm, apparently. More like a warning.
A warning against what?
Against what she called, according to the material, a victimhood mentality. The idea that politicians push this narrative where everything bad stems from racism.
And she used herself as an example.
Exactly. As living proof against it.
Mm.
The sources note this is sort of her standard opening move, positioning herself as the exception.
Then things got more direct. Crockett asked Owens straight up if she thought systemic racism was exaggerated.
And Owens didn't hesitate. Absolutely, the sources say.
Wow. And she backed that up.
Claimed the data doesn't lie. Pointed to things like, more black millionaires, big names in entertainment. Her point, as the sources put it, was victimhood becoming currency.
And the host noticed Owens gaining ground.
Yeah, the material says Brown James sensed Owens was starting to sort of take control of the narrative right there.
Okay, so positions established. Pretty standard debate stuff so far, maybe. But then it took a turn.
A big turn. This is where the sources say it got really interesting. Owens paused things.
How so?
She didn't just keep debating policy points. She waited, the source says, for the right moment, then dropped something unexpected. Said she'd read a public filing the night before.
A public filing? What kind?
Like a court document. Specifically, the sources state it was from a police brutality lawsuit.
Okay. Involving who?
Involving Jasmine Crockett, back when she was a public defender in Dallas.
Whoa, okay. And what was the accusation Owens made based on this filing?
It was incredibly direct, according to the sources. Owens alleged that Crockett represented a black man beaten by police
Okay.
and convinced him to take a low settlement instead of going to trial. Owens basically claimed Crockett wanted it over quickly, then asked her point blank, "Am I wrong?"
Ooh. How did Crockett react to that? The sources must detail this.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like she was completely sideswiped, opened her mouth, no words came out, adjusted her posture, jaw tightening.
Did she deny it?
Initially, she laughed it off,
Yeah.
reportedly. Asked, "What are you talking about?" Sort of dismissively. The host, Brown James, apparently tried to step in, called for respect.
But Owens wouldn't let it go.
Nope. Pushed back, saying she was being respectful by asking how someone could claim to fight for justice when, in her words, she herself helped the system skate before.
So, did Crockett admit it? Did the sources confirm?
Eventually, yes. The sources say she did confirm it. Said she convinced the client to settle.
But she tried to explain it away.
Yeah, immediately framed it as in the past. Said she was a young attorney then, doing what I thought was right.
Wow. That admission must have landed hard. What do the sources say about the room's reaction?
They describe a really noticeable shift. Palpable change in atmosphere. The crew felt it. Producers and apparently viewers at home were just locked in. It was the moment.
And Owens pounced on the admission, I assume.
Instantly. The sources quote her saying, "That's exactly the point." Her argument, the truth never expires.
So she wouldn't let Crockett frame it as just the past?
Not at all. She explicitly linked that past action to Crockett's current public statements, pointed out the contradiction.
How did she phrase that?
She argued, Crockett talks about a fair system and personal responsibility now, but back then, the injustice was real enough for her to advise her client not to fight it fully, and real enough for the city to pay something, acknowledging some level of fault.
Right. The sources highlight Owens's line. You didn't overcome injustice by denying it. You got a settlement by acknowledging it. That must have caused a stir.
The sources mention a murmur in the audience then, and the host, Brown James, tried again to steer back to current policy.
But Owens wasn't having it.
Refused to pivot. Stated flatly, according to the material, we're talking about current policy because of past patterns. We can't discuss justice if we pretend the past didn't happen. That includes her past. She forced the issue.
Okay, so Crockett's pinned down. How did she respond then? Things must have gotten tense.
Oh yeah, the sources describe a real escalation. Crockett reportedly exhaled sharply, said, "You don't know me."
And pushed back harder.
Later, yeah, accused Owens of twisting everything, saying, "People grow, my views have changed." She sort of doubled down on her point that too many people lean on victimhood.
How did Owens counter the people grow argument? That seems like a reasonable point on the surface.
Owens' angle, according to the material, was sharp. She argued Crockett didn't just grow. She grew from that specific experience.
Mino.
Meaning she, as Owens put it, used that experience to build a career. But now, Owens accused her. Instead of empowering others facing similar situations, she tells them they're imagining things that once made you act. It was a direct challenge to her authenticity.
So Crockett felt accused of hypocrisy.
Explicitly, she fired back, "You're trying to paint me as a hypocrite just because I don't go around angry about what happened."
And Owens' response to that?
According to the sources, she reframed her motive. Said, "I'm showing people your story isn't what you claim you benefited from the very system you now call fair."
And she turned to the audience.
Yes. The sources say she addressed the audience directly then, talked about the millions still facing injustice, arguing that pretending it away doesn't actually help them.
That's a tactical shift, bringing the audience in. Did Crockett try to regain control then?
The sources say she pivoted to statistics, crime statistics.
The often cited numbers.
Yep. Reportedly stated, Black Americans make up just 13% of the population, but commit over 50% of violent crimes. That's not emotion, that's FBI data, trying to ground her argument against over-focusing on systemic issues.
And Owens' reaction to the stats.
Sharp, the sources say. Voice had a hint of ice. Asked, "Are you serious?" Called the stats selective.
Her counter-argument being?
That policing isn't neutral, surveillance isn't neutral, crime reporting varies wildly. Basically, the data itself is shaped by the system.
And she tied it back to Crockett personally.
Directly. Her line, according to the material, "The system doesn't treat everyone equally, and you of all people should understand that you lived it as a young attorney." That's when the sources say Crockett looked visibly rattled and unsure, which leads us to what the sources call the climax.
Right. Crockett mentioned feeling exhausted, like she's constantly told she's unqualified or betraying her community for not blaming everything on injustice.
And Owens cut right in. The sources quote her. "Nobody's calling you a traitor, I'm calling you dishonest. There's a difference, Jasmine."
Ouch. That's blunt.
She really pressed it. Said, using a national platform to, in her words, erase the pain of millions of others was like selling a lie with your name on it.
How did Crockett take that?
A scornful laugh, reportedly. Fired back that Owens was the one selling a brand, one that required Owens to pretend she never settled that lawsuit, never needed help, never got hurt.
The sources even noted physical tells.
Yeah, jaw twitching, foot tapping, signs of frustration, it seems.
And the host tried to intervene again.
Brown James tried, yes. But Owens shut it down again. Let's finish this point because it matters. She was locked in.
And this is where she made that statement aimed at the audience.
Exactly. The sources frame it as her speaking directly to you, the listener who might feel dismissed.
What was the core of it?
She argued that telling a black kid they're making excuses ignores that Crockett herself, as that young lawyer, needed someone to believe her client's fear was real and act on it. But now, Owens argued, Crockett implies that needing help or acknowledging fear is weak.
Her stated reason for being there.
According to the sources, "I'm here because too many people watching this show don't have anyone speaking directly to their experience, and I won't let anyone erase that just because it makes a good headline."
How did Crockett respond to that very direct mission statement?
Kind of a dodge, the sources suggest. Said something like, well, at least I'm not crying on cue for sympathy.
And Owens's reaction?
A laugh, the sources say. Not mocking, maybe, but like the argument was empty. Replied, she asks for accountability, not sympathy, and she could handle the weight of it herself.
Crockett's final attempt to label it.
Called it performative politics. Claimed Owens cared more about going viral than honesty.
And then came the line.
The one that cut through everything, according to the sources. Owens delivered calmly.
You can't rewrite history just because the cameras are rolling.
The impact.
Silence, everyone phrased, reportedly. Crockett had no immediate comeback.
Owens elaborated.
Leaned in slightly, the sources say. Reiterated the point. Crockett advised settling because she was scared, young. The client was black and targeted. That was real. Pretending otherwise now. Owens called it survival dressed up as denial.
Crockett protested one last time.
About being accused of betrayal, yeah. Owens' final reply. Reminded her what accountability looks like, said she was bigger than this. The sources note a flicker on Crockett's face then. So the debate ends. Cameras cut. What happened next? An immediate explosion online, the sources detail. Like, before the show was even over, clips everywhere, raw footage leaking, apparently.
And that line, you can't rewrite history.
It was the headline. Memes, GIFs, hashtags. Even usually neutral accounts were sharing clips, the sources say. It just took off.
What about professional commentators?
The sources mention a few. One radio host noted Owens came with facts, didn't back down. Another observed Crockett met someone who just didn't play by the usual political debate rules, and it threw her off.
But the sources seem to emphasize the reaction from everyday people.
Hugely. Teachers, barbers, students, parents, they found it really impactful. And interestingly, they didn't just react, they started digging.
Digging into what? The sources say they looked for archived articles, interviews, and specifically those public filings about the Dallas lawsuit. They verified Owens's claims.
So they confirmed the details she brought up.
Yes, and the contradiction. The sources mention lots of comments online from people saying they felt seen, validated, because Owens called out the denial of a real experience, something they might have felt themselves.
How did Crockett and Owens handle the aftermath?
Crockett responded quickly, according to the sources. Social media posts, a podcast episode that same night, blamed the network, doubled down on accusing Owens of performance.
Did it work?
The sources suggest not entirely, said her response wasn't the unified rally she was used to. People outside her base apparently weren't convinced by the spin.
And Owens?
Her response was minimal, the sources note. A short social media post, photo, 4 words. Stand by the truth. That's it. Sending a message, perhaps.
The sources interpret it that way. Maybe strength isn't volume, or positioning herself as, the calm one.
And because the public was actively looking up the facts.
The conversation about Crockett's past lawsuit just wouldn't go away. Owens's words, particularly about not denying past experiences, gave people a framework, a language, the sources say, to push back when their experiences were dismissed.
Any specific examples of that ripple effect?
The sources mention a couple. A high school teacher in Memphis planning to use the clip as a teaching tool.
And a debate coach.
Yeah, in Tacoma. Use the clip to talk with students about what kind of speaker they wanted to be. The source notes that after watching, no one picked volume.
Interesting. So pulling it all together, looking back at the source material for this deep dive, what's the main takeaway?
I think what really jumps out from the sources is this stark contrast they highlighted between maybe performance and principle.
Explain that a bit.
Well, the sources often describe Crockett's style as relying on volume, on provocation, aiming for that viral moment. This debate seemed to ask, well, what happens when that's met with specific, verifiable facts? What's left?
And Owens's approach in this specific debate.
Characterized in the sources by calmness, clarity, consistency, standing really firm on the facts she'd apparently researched, the sources strongly suggest that approach resonated deeply with viewers, felt more trustworthy than the usual political noise.
And the public reaction seems to back that up.
Absolutely. People digging for facts, parents talking about dignity, viewers inspired by the calm approach. It all suggests, according to the sources, that the real impact didn't come from the shouting, but from that firm stance on truth and consistency.
So this deep dive really shows how public conversations can shift, right? When specific details come out.
Exactly. It moves beyond just broad arguments. It can expose inconsistencies and really demonstrate the power of accountability, of consistency, of, well, dignity in how you communicate.
And it highlights how fast information, even old public records, can surface now and completely change the game for public figures.
Definitely. So, reflecting on all this and the sources we've walked through, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Yeah.
In this world just saturated with information, so much of it feeling like performance, how do you tell the difference between genuine principle and just, well, putting on a show?
And maybe, what does it mean for you to stand by your own story, your own experiences, even when it's tough or inconvenient?
How does that calmness and focus on facts we saw described here compare to the sheer volume, the noise we often get in public debates today? Something to think about.